Hi, I'm Matthew Vadum here on behalf of Clint Carson to talk about his article about the Union of Concerned Scientists. Back in the 1980s, the endless left-wing maligning of Ronald Reagan's SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, painted a cartoonish picture of the president's efforts to defend the United States from nuclear attack from our communist enemy, the Soviet Union. They mocked it by calling it Star Wars, referencing the movie. Many of those heaping undeserved ridicule on the plan belonged to an organization founded in 1969 called the Union of Concerned Scientists, or UCS. Anti-military scientists and engineers, along with other so-called progressives, created this group that grew out of protests at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and other schools across the nation. Since 1969, UCS has been at the forefront of the politicization of science, even though it is not an organization of scientists. Anyone willing to pay $35 can join. One person even signed up his dog to drive the point home. The dog, Kenji, received a welcome kit and a signed letter from the president of UCS. And yet the media often quotes this group of laymen and activists as if it were a scientific rather than a political organization. Since its founding, UCS has agitated and relentlessly churned out propaganda, pushing the United States to disarm and adopt a nuclear no-first-use policy. Think of someone telling you it makes no sense, or is provocative even, to take steps to defend yourself from potential harm, or insure yourself against it. Boiled down, these are the arguments of UCS against missile defense and the possession of strategic nuclear weapons as a deterrent to possible attack. The principle of no first use in nuclear weapons policy parlance is a nation-state's promise not to use nuclear weapons except in retaliation for nuclear attack. It amounts to a pledge not to start a nuclear war. Less charitably, it is a national suicide pact. As with many progressive tropes, the idea sounds noble, if not the very bare minimum standard for decent, civilized society. Of course, in the real world, it is insanity. In addition to their destructive power, nuclear weapons are incredibly useful as a deterrent to any attack, whether it be nuclear or non-nuclear or conventional attacks. Pledging no first use also requires the generous assumption that other nuclear-armed countries will be similarly restrained, which is a risky proposition in an age of nuclear proliferation. UCS has predictably promoted aggressive nuclear disarmament with barely any concern for verification or compliance by U.S. treaty or agreement partners, while simultaneously propounding the notion that it is this very nuclear arsenal that obviates missile defenses. In saying more needs to be done to slash America's nuclear arsenal, UCS does not identify a minimum threshold for a U.S. nuclear deterrent. Does it even have one? UCS's funding comes from many foundations, but the major contributors to its nuclear and global security programs are the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Energy Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Plowshares Fund, and the Tides Foundation. For nearly the last half-century, the Union of Concerned Scientists has openly promoted an anti-military, anti-nuclear weapons, and anti-strategic defense agenda. It argues these forces pose dire threats to the environment and divert from efforts that could otherwise be devoted towards so-called social programs. Likewise, UCS's sources of funding, totaling in the tens of millions of dollars since 1998 alone, derive from radical left-wing foundations and groups dedicated to environmental, social justice, and nuclear disarmament agendas. Given his progressive policies, it should be no surprise that President Obama's strategic nuclear and defense policy and arms control agenda overlaps with UCS's programs. However, with his policy disagreements with the Republican Congress, culminating in 2016 in a standoff over missile defense policy and funding, along with a veto threat, Americans should fully understand the source of his commitments to these issues. Recent North Korean nuclear tests and the emergence of nuclear first-use policy in the first presidential debate between candidates Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have given these issues further urgency. UCS and its funders openly embrace a progressive agenda that for the last 8 years has been advanced by the Obama administration. Is that policy coincidental? Or is its objective to downgrade nuclear forces and missile defenses in favor of the UCS's so-called environmental and social priorities? If you liked this video, please click the link on your right to read the full story on our website, subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. Thanks for watching.